incest is a social norm and dragons roam the land. What you're imagining is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is one of the most popular TV shows of all time that I can guarantee at least every single one of you has either heard of or have watched the Game of Thrones franchise. With the show's second to last season only a few months away, the anticipation has become unbearable for die-hard fans like Kyle, Sam, and I. But even newcomers to the Game of Thrones community, like David, can become just as obsessed as we are. A show with the show's second season coming up. Oh, sorry, excuse me. With a show like this to be in this caliber has to have good writing. With award-winning author George R.R. Martin at the helm of this show's ship, makes for powerful speeches that embody everything that we have learned this semester. So today, we're going to go over how Game of Thrones displays exemplary examples of speeches from the textbook Speak Up. First, I'm going to go into how the show uses truthful communication, followed by Kyle who will go into the show's use of delivery, then Sam will go into group communication, and then David will end us off with ethos, pathos, and logos. So to begin, let's break down an episode in Season 5 that portrays the use of truthful communication. And we'll use a video clip right after this.
Where's Maass? He died. Huh? I put an arrow through his heart.
In the 8th episode of Season 5, main character Jon Snow is faced with a difficult task of persuasion. Jon must convince the Wildlings, a sworn enemy of his group, the Men of the Night's Watch, to join them in battle against a greater threat called the White Walkers. The White Walkers are basically zombies that have come back from the dead to take over the world. Jon must earn the Wildlings' trust in order to defeat the White Walkers in battle. When Jon meets with the Wildlings, he's faced with a difficult decision of whether or not to tell the truth of the Wildlings' leader, Maass Rayder. Maass was captured by the Men of the Night's Watch and sentenced to death by being burned alive. When the execution began, Jon was overcome with compassion for a man who did not deserve this fate. So before the flame could reach Maass, he decides to put an arrow through his heart to show the man mercy. When the Wildlings asked Jon what had happened to their leader, he decides to tell the truth of what happened. This scene between Jon Snow and the Wildlings is a great example of communicating truthfully. By Jon communicating truthfully, he was able to establish credibility and trustworthiness. According to the textbook, when a speaker lies to his audience, he risks the chance of losing his listeners' trust. For Jon's situation, how could he ever gain the Wildlings' trust by beginning their alliance on a lie? According to the textbook, people lie because they are afraid of what their audience would do if they knew the truth. Jon showed courage by communicating truthfully and established credibility as a trustworthy leader. Now, Jon could have led the Wildlings to a false inference. Jon had an opportunity to give an omission in his response to the Wildlings' question. According to the textbook, an omission is a type of false inference where the speaker misleads the audience by not what he says, but by what he doesn't say. In Jon's case, he could have easily left out who had killed Maass. If Jon had just said that Maass was dead and nothing else, then the Wildlings could have been led to a false conclusion about how he had died. The false inference created by the omission could lead the Wildlings to infer an even worse fate for their leader. Jon also could have used a half-truth when describing how Maass had died. According to the textbook, a half-truth is when the speaker begins his statement with a truth and then mixes the rest of it with a lie. Jon very easily could have done this as well. Jon could have told the Wildlings that Maass was dead, but from a different person. An even more unethical speaker might have even said that it was a White Walker that had killed Maass Rayder in order to get the Wildlings to join him and support him. Truthful communication is one of the basic guidelines for ethical speaking. Although the Wildlings were outraged by the truth of Maass's death, Jon was still able to gain their support in the battle against the White Walkers. So now that we've talked about truthful communication within the show, let's see what Kyle has to say about the show's use of effective delivery.
We're going to watch a short clip in Season 6, Episode 10.
Your son was butchered at the Red Wedding, Lord Manderley, but you refused the call. You swore allegiance to House Stark, Lord Glover, but in their hour of greatest need, you refused the call. And you, Lord Kerwin, your father was skinned alive by Ramsay Bolton. Still, you refused the call. But House Mormont remembers. The North remembers. We know no king, but the king in the North whose name is Stark. I don't care if he's a bastard. Ned Stark's blood runs through his veins. He's my king, from this day until his last day.
Dozens of tribes.
Sorry, digressed.
As you can see, Game of Thrones is much more than just a popular TV series. It has many moments that sends chills down your spine. One of those moments was on Season 6 finale, where Lady Marmot gives this speech that results in Jon Snow becoming King of the North after they defeated Ramsay Bolton to take back the North Kingdom. I will show how this spine-chilling speech used many techniques of speech delivery in its climactic conclusion to Season 6, making all Games of Thrones enthusiasts waiting on the edge of their seat for Season 7 to release. First, let's talk about her use of verbal delivery to convey a strong, convincing message. Her volume was strong and loud, so her voice could carry across to all listeners in the room and created a bigger presence than her small stature. The tone she used needed to be strong and very stern, because her audience was mainly male and much older. With her use of tone and volume, she established good credibility, eliminating any doubts of her age and gender. Tone and volume can be a big part of building credibility and getting your audience's full attention. Now, for her rate of delivery. Her rate she delivered with her speech was excellent. She spoke quickly to get to her points across before anyone could interrupt her thoughts or take insult to them before she finished. Then she paused to let each person she was speaking to take in the message. This really helped to make the speech more dramatic and powerful. Now that we've talked about the use of verbal delivery skills that she used in this powerful speech, let's talk about her non-verbal delivery. To convey a powerful, influential message and make sure that it reached all her listeners, she used a combination of verbal and non-verbal delivery skills. Let's talk about eye contact. She makes great eye contact towards the individuals she's addressing. By making eye contact with individuals that she is addressing, she strengthened her statements of their loyalty. Besides making eye contact, she conveyed strong, stern facial expressions, which helped her send a tone of her message. One last non-verbal delivery skill that she used was gestures. During her addressing of the different rulers that didn't answer the call to support the Starks, she had made head gestures to show her displeasure of the lack of support, even though they all had a common enemy. Non-verbal delivery skills can really help solidify a speaker's message, as we saw with Lady Marmot in her speech. With the use of eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures, Lady Marmot's speech went from a great speech to a powerful one. As we discussed how verbal skills like volume, tone, and rate of delivery can create more credibility and make your message more powerful, then we took a glance at nonverbal delivery skills and how they can solidify your message like Lady Marmot did with eye contact, facial expressions, and gestures. Game of Thrones is full of electrifying speeches throughout its 6 seasons. But I picked this speech because it shows an awesome power of how a small-statured young woman can convey a giant and vigorous speech with the use of immense delivery skills. Now that we've seen how using verbal and nonverbal delivery skills can transform your speech into a strong, intriguing speech, let's explore what Sam has to say about group communication.
We're going to see a clip from Season 6, Episode 7.
Dozens of tribes, hundreds of generations. Feel like we were never there at all. We'll be the last of the free folk.
That's what'll happen to you if we lose.
The Boltons, the Carstarks, the Umbers, they know you're here. They know that more than half of you are women and children. After they finish with me, they'll come for you. You're right. This isn't your fight. You shouldn't have to come to Winterfell with me. I shouldn't be asking you. It's not the deal we made. But I need you with me if we're going to beat them, and we need to beat them if you're going to survive.
The speech you just saw was part of when Jon Snow went over to the Wildlings and tried to recruit their help for a battle with Ramsay Bolton upcoming, much like in the speech Matt talked about. I'm going to be explaining how this speech's use of group communication relates to the textbooks. Jon finds himself traveling over to the Wall to ask for the Wildlings' help because Ramsay Bolton is coming to attack Jon Snow and his army. And Jon Snow explains to them that while it's imminent for only Jon and his men at the moment, it's going to be imminent for them in the future for the Wildlings because they know where they are and they're going to come wipe them out afterwards. Jon says they must come together or else they're all going to be killed, and that's their ultimate goal Jon has, is to convince them to work together. And Jon is speaking to a small group, which allows him to tailor his speech and make it more personal to the people receiving it, because these are the leaders of the Wildlings and not just the Wildlings in general, like a big crowd. And Jon's group dynamics with them in the past, as his relationship with was shown with Kyle's speech, allows him in some areas to relate and function together well with people like Tormund, who I'm going to explain later in the speech. And this determines whether their mission can ultimately be achieved and if they can work together in the future. Jon is the designated leader in this role because he is the only one who knows the Wildlings, and he's the one speaking in behalf of his army. He allows appropriate behavior and decision to occur during the speech. He knows he can't just barge in and demand that they help him, because he needs to convince them to fight for him, and he doesn't want them to say no because they'll both be killed as a result. Jon also acts as an initiator because he's proposing a solution to a task. And Tormund, who is the one that agreed with Jon, acts as a clarifier. And that is because he is clarifying Jon's speech to his fellow peers, the Wildlings, and trying to convince them to join Jon's cause. And he also says if it weren't for Jon, he would be dead, and they might also be dead as well because of the past fight that Matt explained. And there's another man named Dim Dalba, and he takes the role of the evaluator because he disagrees with Jon, and he offers alternative solutions or thoughts and ideas that Jon doesn't agree with, but leads to further discussion and the ultimate decision. Jon calmly tells Dim Dalba the reality that they can all be killed if they don't help now, and this is their only chance for survival. Jon says it isn't all their fight, but they will all have to fight eventually. And this rallies both group together, and if they don't work together, they're also facing death. And Jon focuses on the content of the speech rather than the people involved, because he knows that can sometimes lead to specific people having personal attachments to ideas instead of the content. And Jon's aware that when ideas get associated with specific people, they become invested in those ideas. And the group faces more heterogeneity than homogeneity, as the group is more diverse than usually speeches have, or than usual groups are, because Jon is speaking to a group of Wildlings that don't exactly trust him based on some of his actions in the past, even though he helped them in the previously, as Matt explained. And Jon knows this can be extremely challenging to speak in. So as a result, Jon takes the role of a compromiser, because he's attempting to find a common ground amongst both groups and find out how they can function together and find a solution that works for both of them. And Jon and his group follows the reflective speaking process. Jon first defines the problem to the Wildlings by explaining that Ramsay Bolton is coming, and he's coming for us, and if we don't stop him, he's going to come for you too. The group altogether then analyzes the problem, with others weighing in, such as Tormund and Dim Dalba. The criteria is then established for solving the problem, as well as possible solutions being then generated, ultimately only being help or don't help. And finally, they ultimately to select to fight with Jon. And because of Jon's effective group communications in the form of his ability to manage conflicts, the roles he assumes during the speech, and the implementation of the reflective thinking process, he's able to convince the wildlings to lend their hand in battle, which ultimately leads to both of their entire groups being saved. Now David is going to close our presentation by explaining how ethos, pathos, and logos are shown in the beginning of the show that he had seen for the first time.
All right, so I'm going to start off by showing you guys the teaser trailer for season 1.
Winter's coming. This one will belong, and dark things will come with it. Hustle, hustle.
I know they did it. In my rooms, I knew it.
Boy, you won't talk, but if he does, I'll kill him.
I don't want to be disappointed. I want to get home.
My brother has a sword, and I have my mind.
You might not have my name. You have my blood.
Honor! Getting his honor that's teaming the peace of fear!
Distrusting me was the wisest thing you've done.
Everyone who isn't us is an enemy now.
You killed me. Your brother's a dead man. I'll kill the whole bloodline of them until you and I are the only people left in this world.
All right, pretty sweet, right? So that was that's the only thing I saw before watching the show. So, I mean, if you can think about it from my perspective, I've heard so much hype about this show. You know, I obviously have never watched it, kind of because it just sounds like a lot, right? There's a lot of characters, clearly, and there's a lot going on. So why would someone want to watch a show? Well, I'm going to tell you, using ethos, pathos, and logos, why this is one of the best shows in U.S. history, or why people think it is, based on my close viewing of the first episode, which I watched a few days ago. So the first thing I noticed in the first episode was the title is "Winter is Coming." Now, as someone who's never seen Game of Thrones, that's the only quote I ever hear associated with it, and it's the title of the first episode. And I think that the fact that it's so famous attests to the quality of the first episode. It's saying, you know, the first episode is this good, and it's hooked people for this long, so it's got to be crazy. So I'm going to start out by talking about the pathos of the situation. So pathos starts by appealing to pathos, according to the textbook, appeals to the emotions of the viewer. And this is applied very many times in the first episode to pull the viewer's heartstrings. I'll start by talking about the first scene, where a group stumbles upon a bunch of mutilated bodies. Their heads on stakes, bodies cut in half, and children. There's a shot of a dead kid's face where like the rest of his body's cut in half that goes on for like 7 seconds. And I would show that, but I'm not going to do that. And in another scene, a child watches his father behead a man, apparently to help him better become a man. So that shows something about, you know, obviously watching someone behead a man will attest to the viewer's heartstrings, especially if it's making your son do it, you know. So it's definitely different. So I'm going to connect that to the ethos, which is the ethics of their world, which are definitely interesting. So Martin distinguishes very early the ethics of his world from ours. Like I said in the first scene, we see all those mutilated bodies, but also we see a guy get beheaded before the title sequence even starts. So he lets you know real quick what you're going to be in for. In the first episode also is a Khaleesi wedding ceremony. And in that, it's men and women, or it's men fighting to the death over women to rape. And it just sort of, and it's part of the ceremony, so there's people sitting there watching it. And it sort of makes you, you know, question the ethics, and it definitely intrigued me. I was like, all right, what the hell is going on here? I want to find out. And so that's another thing it offers. Moving on to the logos now, the logic of Martin's world. So it's employed in a bit of a skewed manner in the show as well, but I think that's another reason why it's so different and so popular. So in the final scene of this show, the same boy who watches his father beheaded is climbing a rock and up in a cliff, and he hears two people having sex, goes over there, it's a queen having an affair. And the man, you know, there's this tension, obviously, because she sees him, they see each other, he gets caught, and the man says, "Oh, the things I do for love," and pushes him off a cliff. And this is like a, you know, like 8-year-old boy. So the logic there sort of tells you the priorities that the people have in this world. The other thing, the logic by the production team itself in terms of casting the show. There's a lot of different types of creatures in this world, and they need all types of different people to play them. And it's realistic that there would be different types of men and women. And Peter Dinklage is a main character, and he's a little person, and you don't see that very often in television. The last thing I want to point out about the logic is the nature of the society itself that he creates, this sort of power-hungry, struggle for power thing that you will do anything to sort of attain it. In conclusion, we showed you guys why Game of Thrones is one of the most popular shows, will go down as one of the most popular shows in United States history. Matt told you all how the show uses truthful communication. Kyle told you about the importance and effectiveness of delivery, especially if you're a little girl. Sam told you about how group communication helps get the message across. And as someone who has never seen Game of Thrones before, I can tell you that after watching the first episode, I am certain that it will be one of the best shows in American history.